April 30th, 1970, President Richard Nixon ordered troops to invade Cambodia due to his suspicion of the Viet Cong using the area as a safe space in the war against South Vietnam. At this point in time, American troops had been aiding South Vietnam for more than 10 years, and as a result were growing weary. The news of the Cambodian invasion was announced hours after the invasion began. Many Americans were shocked and outraged. Nixon's presidential campaign was based on the very opposite, removing American soldiers from the Vietnam War. Americans' disapproval translated into rallies and demonstrations across the country. In Kent, Ohio, students of Kent State University began publicizing their disapproval by organizing anti-war rallies. The rallies lasted the entire weekend following the public announcement of the invasion of Cambodia. On May 1st, only hours after hearing the news, students along with other activists met in the bar in downtown Kent to discuss what to do about the invasion. Afterwards, they wandered the streets fueled not only by rage from the announcement, but quite possibly inhibited by the consumption of alcohol. They set fire to garbage cans and broke store windows. The police arrived at the scene and they arrested a dozen protesters. The following morning, James Rhodes, governor of Ohio, was informed of the previous night's situation. He called the Ohio National Guard to try and maintain peace in the city Kent, Ohio. That night, around 8 p.m., students at Kent State set fire to an old rickety ROTC building on campus. While firefighters attempted to stabilize the situation and blaze, protesters cut the fire hoses being used. Guardsmen reported that night to disperse the crowd, resulting in an order of 1,200 National Guardsmen to be stationed on campus. Governor Rhodes spoke on the protest scene, calling protesters worse than the brown shirts and the communist elements. Student activists hung flyers around the campus to rally another protest on Central Campus Monday, May 4th, at noon. On the morning of May 4th, students informed professors of their planned absence to attend the rally. Graduate students were seen symbolically burning the Constitution, for they believed it resembled the actions Nixon took when he sent troops into Cambodia. Students at this protest ranged from those passionately involved, some partially participating, and others just sitting and watching out of curiosity. The Ohio National Guard arrived on campus around noon, May 4th, as the rally began. The Guard was greeted by screams and rocks flying at them. The Guard ordered the thousands of college students to leave. Instead, the students got louder. The Guardsmen suited up with tear gas masks, bayonets on the end of their rifles, and launched tear gas into the crowds. Members of the crowd threw the tear gas canisters back at the Guardsmen in retaliation. The Guardsmen forced the students down the hill and onto the football practice field. Eventually, Guardsmen were blocked by fences on three sides with protesters on the other. They had no choice other than to retreat back up the hill. 20 minutes passed from the time the rally in the Commons was dispersed. Once the guards reached the top, approximately 28 guards opened fire on the unarmed college students. Within 13 seconds, about 67 bullets were fired. Victim Dean Collar recalled, "When the shooting stopped, it was very eerie and quiet for a moment. Then the wailing and the screaming resurfaced, but this time it was a much greater pitch. People were getting up and seeing the damage that had been done. 13 students were now laying on the ground." 20-year-old student activist Jeffrey Miller was dead instantly. Within minutes, Sandra Schuer was also among those killed. Sandra was not participating in the rally, but was walking from one class to the next when chaos broke loose. Students were injured from shots that were as far as 750 feet away. Others were as close as 71 feet from the shots fired. Uninjured students rushed to aid those wounded. While students and protesters attempted to help over the next couple of hours, 2 more students died from severe wounds. Allison Krause was among these 2. Curiosity brought her to the rally that day. The second student to die within those 2 hours was bystander William Schroeder. Injured student Dean Collar was at the rally with plans to make it to his 1:10 p.m. class. Instead, he was paralyzed and wheelchair confined for the remainder of his life. The incident became known as the Kent State Massacre. Kent State University was closed immediately and stayed closed for the following 6 weeks. As the public became aware of the event, both hate and hope arose. The following day, President Richard Nixon called for hope to arise from darkness. This should remind us all, once again, that when dissent turns into violence, it invites tragedy. It is my hope that this tragic and unfortunate incident will strengthen the determination of all the nation's campuses, administrators, faculties, and students alike to stand firmly for the right which exists in this country of peaceful dissent, and just as strong against the resort to violence as a means of such expression. The family of the deceased, Jeffrey Miller, began receiving hate mail for Jeffrey's involvement in the protests. But, at the same time, many people reached out to his family thanking them for his persistence to make a change. Dr. Benjamin Spock, a world-renowned pediatrician, spoke at Jeffrey Miller's funeral service and said that the victims of the Kent State shootings may do more to end the Vietnam War than all the rest of us have been able to do. Anti-war activism began to arise around the country. First Amendment advocates began protesting for their rights. Outraged students began protesting at their universities, and protests began to take place at the Capitol as well. The Kent State Massacre affected young adults across the country. Nick Saban was a freshman attending Kent State at the time of the shootings. 40 years later, he is still traumatized, yet enlightened, by the events that took place that day.
But saw the aftermath right after it happened, and it's made me have a lot of appreciation for a lot of things. It actually made me appreciate the fact that law and order is very important, but it also made me appreciate the fact of what those students were trying to express in terms of, the Vietnam War and the demonstrations that they were having, but and the confrontation that occurred was unnecessary.
While this tragic event led to students immersing themselves in their rights as a U.S. citizen, legal issues began to arise from the massacre as well. President Nixon issued the Scranton Commission in June of 1970 to investigate the Kent State shootings and campus violence around the country. The commission was published in September and stated that although the violent actions of the students may have contributed to the events that took place, the shootings that took place at Kent State on May 4th were unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable. The family sued 8 of the guardsmen on terms of depriving students of their constitutional rights. Extensive research was put into the trial. The 12 jury members were even taken to the site of the shootings and simulation bullets were set off. After extensive research, the jury decided that they could not, without a reasonable doubt, prove that the guardsmen acted on premeditation or had any prior intent of killing students. 5 guardsmen were charged with felonies, while 3 were charged with a misdemeanor. Another legal battle arose from the shootings. On January 5, 1979, an 8-year legal case was closed when the state controlling board paid $675,000 in an out-of-court settlement to the parents of the 4 dead students and the 9 injured in the Kent State Massacre. While some took this as a victory, some believed money to keep them out of a mess was not good enough. Laurel Krause, sister of Allison Krause, who was killed during the Kent State Massacre, has founded the Kent State Truth Tribunal in hopes to receive a full account of the tragic events. Many Americans view the Kent State Massacre as the day the United States lost their innocence, but it also helped America come together in unity. May 4, 1970 led to young students immersing themselves into American politics as well as the recognition of their own and others' First Amendment rights. The legacy of the tragic deaths led to great change in American politics. The 4 Americans that sacrificed their lives on campus led to Americans overseas getting to come home to their families faster. In conclusion, although the Kent State Massacre led to tragic deaths of 4 students, it shed light on political issues in America that needed to be addressed and helped speed up the process of pulling American soldiers out of the Vietnam War.